Hi 4K, Miss H is going to read you the story called Mrs. Goose and the Rock and Roll Band. This was written by Michael Teitelbaum and illustrated by Phil Bliss. Mrs. Goose and the Rock and Roll Band. Georgie Goose ran down the stairs as quickly as he could. It was Monday night, and that meant just one thing. It was time for the rock and roller show. "Oh boy," said Georgie, "I can hardly wait. This is my favorite show." The theme music for the rock and roller show was playing, and little Georgie Goose was singing and dancing to the sound of his favorite rock and roll band. "Someday I'm going to be a big rock and roll star too," thought Georgie. Then he drifted off into a daydream. He was in a bright, fancy costume, sitting in a shiny new set of drums, playing for a big crowd of his friends and fans. Georgie's daydreaming was interrupted by the sound of his mother's voice. "Georgie, have you done your homework yet?" called Mrs. Goose, who was enjoying an after-dinner cup of tea in the next room. "I'll finish my homework right after the show, Mom," Georgie called back. Sometimes do you like to daydream? I know I do. But when the rock and roller show ended, Georgie ran into the kitchen. He pulled out some old pots, pans, lids, and wooden spoons and raced upstairs to his room. In his room, Georgie set up the pots, pans, and lids like drums and cymbals. He took the 2 wooden spoons and began to drum away. "This is great," thought Georgie, "just like the rock and rollers." Have you ever used your grown-ups' pots and pans to make a drum set? That's fun, but noisy. "Georgie, have you finished your homework yet?" called Mrs. Goose from the bottom of the stairs. "Not yet, Mom," answered Georgie. "I'll do it now." Georgie put down the wooden spoons and started his homework. As soon as he finished, he went right back to his drumming. The next day at school, Georgie met up with his friends, who were also fans of the rock and rollers. "Did you see the show last night?" asked Georgie. "It was great," said Ferdy Frog. "I love the rock and rollers," added Timmy Tiger. This book has tricky pages. After school, the 3 friends went to Georgie's basement to play. "Wouldn't it be great if we could form our own rock and roll band, just like rock and rollers?" asked Ferdy. "But we don't have any instruments," said Timmy. "We can make our own instruments." George played the pots and pans and sang, "Honk, honk, honk." I wonder what other instruments they're going to make. Ferdy made a homemade guitar out of a shoebox, a long piece of wood, and some rubber bands. He sang along, croaking, "Ribbit, ribbit, ribbit." Timmy took a cardboard paper towel tube and played it like a trumpet. He also joined in the singing, roaring, "Growl, growl, growl." So a guitar, a trumpet, and drums. "This is fun," said Ferdy. "But what should we call ourselves?" asked Timmy. "Every band needs a name. Since our instruments are homemade, we can call ourselves Homemade Fun," said Georgie. Everyone agreed that was a fine name. Homemade Fun continued to play and sing for the rest of the afternoon. Meanwhile, Mrs. Goose was glad that Georgie and his friends were having such a good time, but she was also glad that she was wearing earplugs. Each day after school, Homemade Fun practiced in Mrs. Goose's basement, and each day Mrs. Goose kept her earplugs in place. Earplugs are little things you put in your ears, special little things you put in your ears to keep the sound out. Kind of like earbuds. One day, a few weeks later, Georgie, Ferdy, and Timmy were walking to school. Suddenly, the 3 friends stopped in their tracks. "Look!" shouted Georgie, pointing at a poster. "The rock and rollers are coming to town to play a concert." At school, Georgie and his friends got another surprise. "There's going to be a talent contest," said Georgie. "It will be judged by none other than the rock and rollers themselves." "It says here," began Ferdy, "that the winner of the talent contest gets tickets to the rock and rollers concert and a special prize." Ooh, that's exciting. Do you think they're going to enter the contest? Let's see. "What are we waiting for?" asked Timmy. "Let's sign up for the contest." Georgie was already daydreaming about winning the contest and meeting his idols. Day after day, Georgie, Ferdy, and Timmy practiced on their homemade instruments. "The song is sounding better," said Georgie, "but we have to keep working on it if we're going to win the talent contest." Practice makes perfect. One afternoon, Mrs. Goose decided to take her earplugs out and listen to the band. Thought Mrs. Goose. "They really are getting better." Then she came up with an idea. Mrs. Goose took out her sewing machine and went to work. Finally, the big day arrived. "I have a surprise for you, boys," said Mrs. Goose. She pulled out 3 costumes for the band to perform in. "Wow," said Ferdy. "Thanks a lot, Mrs. Goose," said Timmy. "I guess we really are homemade fun," said Georgie. "Even our costumes are homemade." "Thanks, Mom." She's using her sewing machine. Look at their cool costumes. Mrs. Goose and the 3 boys arrived at the school auditorium. Excitement was in the air. This was a special night for everyone. After waiting for what seemed like forever, Georgie, Ferdy, and Timmy finally got their turn to perform. "Ladies and gentlemen," the master of ceremonies announced, "homemade fun." The band launched into their first song, and the audience went wild, clapping and singing along. Mrs. Goose sat with her fingers crossed, hoping and rooting for the boys. Remember, what would they get if they won? They got to meet the band and have another special surprise. Homemade Fun finished their part of the show and left the stage to thunderous applause. Then the big moment arrived. The rock and rollers were up on stage to announce the winner. Mrs. Goose and the boys all held their breath. And the winner is Homemade Fun! Georgie couldn't believe his ears. Timmy, Ferdy, and he ran up to the stage to meet their heroes. "You guys were terrific," said Mick Monkey, leader of the rock and rollers. "Gee, thanks," said Georgie, who could hardly believe this was happening to him. "Each of you wins a ticket to our concert," said Mick, handing the tickets to George. They won! Hooray! "But that's not all," said Mick. "Your special prize is a set of real instruments." The 3 boys looked on in amazement as the curtain pulled back to show a real guitar, trumpet, and drum set. "I think you'll have to change the name of your band now," joked Mick Monkey. Georgie, Ferdy, and Timmy just stared at the beautiful new instruments. The very next afternoon, Georgie was up in his room practicing on his new drums. "I feel like a real rock and roll star now," thought Georgie as he banged away on the drums, making quite a racket. That means a big noise. Mrs. Goose called, "Georgie, have you finished your homework yet?" Georgie couldn't hear his mother. They won new instruments. Look at his cool new drum set. Mrs. Goose sighed and settled into her comfortable chair with her newspaper, cup of tea, and her earplugs. Some things never change. The end.